Hello, my name's Simon Cade and this is DSLR Guide. Today I'm going to be talking about this little camera here. It's my B camera that I use and it's the Canon IXUS 220HS. Now you can see that my version here has quite a lot of cosmetic wear. This is because I bought it on eBay used, but I managed to pick up a good deal getting it for £30, so I'm very happy. Now the image quality on this, I would say, is pretty good. It stacks up to my DSLR. For the price, I would say it does a very good job. It shoots in full HD video, so that's 1080p at 24 frames per second, which is always useful. And when it's not in low light, it's, for most people, probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between this and my DSLR. Obviously, with it being a compact camera, you're not going to get the same kind of shallow depth of field look that so many people like on a DSLR. It's got a pretty good zoom range, from 4.3 to 21.5 millimeters, which by the time you've factored in the crop factor, that's about 20 to 120 millimeters, which is a kind of good overall zoom range. 20 being plenty wide enough for most situations, and 120 millimeters being pretty good. It's a 5 times optical zoom. I would say that to avoid using it at the wide end, because 4.7 millimeters is actually very wide, and even though you've got the crop factor to 20 millimeters, it doesn't look like a 20 millimeter on a 5D Mark II, because the compression is still it still looks like a wide angle lens, which kind of gives it this disorientated, unnatural feel. So whenever I'm using it, I tend to just zoom in as much as I can for the shot. You know, if I can, I'll back up. But generally, after using it for a day, I never had to use it completely zoomed out. So there aren't many situations where you'd have to use it on the full wide scale, but it's nice to still have that option. So in terms of the build quality, obviously it's a much smaller camera, but it feels pretty solid. You can see my one's got quite a lot of cosmetic wear. It looks as if it's been dropped at least a few times. But it still works perfectly, so that gives me confidence. You know, if this has been dropped many times and you can see all the paint's come off, then that suggests to me that it's pretty much well made. So the battery I've got here for it is the official Canon one that came with it. Now for a used battery and a used camera, I was very impressed with the battery life. I was surprised that it would last at least a whole day, which is pretty good compared to a DSLR where you'd have up to 5 in one day. I don't know if this is probably quite normal for a point and shoot camera, but despite the fact that it could be at least a year old, I think that's pretty good. So I was expecting to have to buy a replacement battery, but was very impressed with how long lasting the battery is, and that's for video. So also, you know, with this being a point and shoot camera, you could imagine that they would have it optimized for photo battery life, which is kind of seems like what the DSLR is. Now obviously it takes regular SD cards. I've got 16GB SD card in there. I think you probably can put 32GB cards in there, but as far as I'm concerned, you can get quite a lot of footage out of a 16GB. I don't think you'd want to go any bigger than that. As far as how much time exactly it is, I don't know, but I know you can get at least an hour on a 16GB card, so I'd be surprised if you did multiple, although that's something you want to look into if you are considering doing a lot of shooting on it. So the autofocus is pretty okay. It works pretty flawlessly the majority of the time. Obviously you haven't got shallow depth of field to make its job any harder, but the majority of the time you don't have to worry about focus. Now every once in a while it will kind of just drop out and start to kind of very slightly drop out of focus and then very slowly and gradually bring it back. But this is not a huge problem. It's usually if you just have it set up for a long time that you'll actually notice this. But for the majority of things it's fine. Also has quite a cool feature of 240 frames per second. Now obviously this is at a lower resolution, but it's quite a cool feature that even the Canon cameras don't have. Although you're going to want to make sure that you've got a lot of light, because when you're shooting at 240 frames per second, the shutter speed has to be about double that, which means that obviously your image is going to get a lot darker. So that's something to think about. Now, the overall low light performance of this camera is not that great. With having a smaller sensor and the lens being a zoom lens, it's not particularly brilliant. But there are workarounds, you know. So I would say for indoors, no matter what, you're going to get it pretty grainy unless you've got some external lighting to brighten it up. But you know, with video, you need to keep the shutter speed at around 50, a 50th of a second. So by the time you've zoomed in on this lens, which is a 2.7 to 5.9, if you're zooming in, then obviously it's going to stop down and get even darker. So that's something to think about. If you're going to be indoors, then you want to shoot as wide as possible for the majority of the time, or you're going to have to go outside or just get some proper lights to light your scene. So the noise performance is not that great, but for a little camera for the price, I don't know, it seems okay to me. So I'm going to generally use this camera as a B camera. So the main reason being, if I ever need to have two cameras rolling, like for instance if I'm doing a very complicated stunt or something that I really don't want to miss, something that we can't just do over and over and over again, then I'll try and have two cameras running. But when it's not doing that, it'll be used as a behind the scenes camera. Or if I need to do an underwater shot, then I'd be much happier to put this in a waterproof casing than my expensive DSLR. Same with shots like if I was going to mount a tripod on a car, something where it's likely to get damaged, then I would again be much happier to use this than my DSLR. So the overall image quality is pretty good. Obviously it shoots full HD, and in the right situations it's pretty comparable to my DSLR. Now obviously it hasn't got interchangeable lenses, so you can't get an f1.4 or f1.8 out of it. The best it's got is a 2.7 aperture, which is okay, but the problem is that f2.7 is only on the widest zoom. So if you were to zoom in, then it will stop down all the way to 4.9, which is kind of problematic because I generally want to avoid using the wide end of the zoom range. So by the time you zoom in, it gets darker. Now this is fine for outdoor shooting, and that's where I'd really recommend this camera to use the majority of the time. But if you do have to do it indoors, then you're going to get some pretty noisy images.